Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Nick, and in today's video I want to talk about what's better to buy, an adult crested gecko or a baby crested gecko. So let's talk about the pros and cons. Let's get right into it. But before we do that, I ask you guys to please like the video, hit that subscribe button, and comment something down below and start a conversation. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. So since I have an adult here, I think the first thing that we should talk about is the pros to buying an adult crested gecko. So the biggest pro to buying an adult crested gecko for your first crested gecko, or maybe it's one of your first couple crested geckos, is that you're getting an animal that is clearly well established, and typically by the time it's an adult, the amount of things that can happen to that gecko randomly does somewhat reduce compared to a baby, which can sometimes along the way randomly get sick. Better overall started animal like this, there's a higher chance of it living than maybe you as a beginner who doesn't know much that gets a baby and you may not know what to do as well. And that's just because these animals, once they hit adulthood, they become a little more hardy, and they become a little bit better at taking care of themselves, you know, more than you taking care of them to a certain extent, if that makes sense. Another huge advantage to buying an adult, you only have to invest money in one tank. And for anybody that's done the progressions of tanks for crested geckos, you know how expensive that can get. And you also know that if you only want a couple crested geckos, eventually those beginning tanks that you bought, they kind of have to get either, you'd have to sell them, or you just hang on to them for the next time you get a crested gecko, because they're not really much use for your adults that you have now, right? So big advantage, one tank, one purchase, lasts this adult forever, instead of the baby who's kind of got to get a couple tanks in it before it gets to that big size tank. So let's talk about the two, in my opinion, the two biggest cons to buying an adult right off the bat. One con is that you don't really get to experience your gecko growing up. You don't get to experience the changes in that crested gecko along the way. You don't really get to experience seeing like how your gecko got its personality. And having that experience of growing up the gecko and raising it the way you want to, if you're someone who likes to handle your gecko a lot, it might be better to get a baby. After you let it settle in and it's eating and everything, you can get it out a lot and you can hold it and you can play with it, and then that way it becomes accustomed to you. Whereas maybe this adult, if I sell you an adult, this adult might be accustomed to me and how I do things, and then when you get it, it may not react the same way. There's always a potential for that. So that's one thing. The other, probably the biggest con to these adults is typically they're going to cost a lot more money. And the reason is for that is a lot of people will buy adults. Typically the people who buy adults are buying to breed the adults, okay? So if you're buying an adult to breed it, you're gonna probably end up paying more money. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about the pros and cons of an adult, let's talk about the pros and the cons of a little baby. This little baby is about almost 4 months old, actually. So it's about 5 or 6 grams. It's very small still, which is kind of just right off the bat, maybe another pro or con depending on what you prefer. Crested geckos are very slow growing animals. Typically takes them, 18 months is a fast growing gecko to get to about 40 grams, but it's not uncommon for it to take them a full 24 to 28 months or so. Typically by 3 years, your gecko really should be at 40 grams. A big pro to that is that since they are slow growing, you get a lot of opportunities to watch them grow. And watching these geckos grow is something that's actually really cool, and it's really fun. You take, for instance, a gecko like this, and this gecko, when I first hatched it, it only had like 2 or 3 or 4 spots on it, and now it has a very good coverage of its body with spots on it. I can't even count how many spots are on it at the moment. So that was really fun to see, and just to like look at this gecko and watch it grow, and just see after every shed it changing more and more and more, and getting better color, getting more spots. All of a sudden it's showing portholes now out of nowhere. It didn't have portholes a week ago. That must be new as well. So it's really interesting just to see how much your gecko changes, especially in a short period of time. A 4 to 6 month period of time, your gecko changes a ton. Another pro to getting a baby is that they're actually typically going to be cheaper in price. You know, if you're going out there and you're looking to buy like a Super Dalmatian baby, an Extreme Harlequin baby, or a very high-end morph baby, typically that will still run you a larger amount of money. I know that I have some really nice geckos that I can usually sell for about $120 to $150 shipped, somewhere in that range, and that is typically a lot easier for somebody, a beginner, to budget in and to expect to spend on their new gecko. So you're gonna get a cheaper gecko, which is a pro, and you get to watch it grow, which is definitely a pro. Make sure though that you're not just buying the first cheap gecko that you see. I highly recommend buying from breeders. Go on Morph Market, check out people's ratings. If you think that they have good ratings and they have good geckos and you like one of their geckos, then get that gecko. Supporting breeders is something that I just think is super important, and it's really something you guys should look into before you just go to a pet store. That's just my opinion on that. One of the cons would be they're more fragile than adults. That's a huge con. And that's not to say, and by fragile I don't mean, oh, if you drop them they're gonna die. I just mean that typically throughout a gecko's lifespan, the first 6 to 8 months is very critical, and it's very important that they're having the proper diet and that they're getting the proper everything that they need to be healthy adults, right? So, and it's not uncommon for in that first 6 to 8 months to a year for something, even though it's rare, potentially for something to develop like an underlying illness or an ailment or something like that that you couldn't know that the gecko had whenever it was sold at 3 months old or 2 months old or whatever, whenever you bought it. So that's something that's kind of a disadvantage, is there's always that risk of something developing over time, and that does happen, sadly. Another con, and we kind of touched on it with the adults, is you're gonna have to buy a smaller tank. Now there's a lot of debate on that too. I believe that you should probably do smaller tanks, and then once the gecko hits about 15 grams, you can try to put it in the adult size tank, which is 18 by 18 by 24 or larger, depending on whatever you want to do. I don't see an issue, but the first 15 grams, I personally feel that my geckos do better in something smaller. For at least the first 15 grams, after that, they're usually fine to just be in whatever size tank I throw them in, and they thrive perfectly fine. Probably the biggest con, and it's going to correlate back to what I was saying earlier about buying from a good breeder. A lot of people breed geckos and they sell them super cheap just to flip them and just to make a little bit of money. And a lot of the times those geckos are not well started, and sadly you're kind of buying a gecko that may not do very well in the long run. Getting a well started gecko is the most important thing, and if you're buying from a breeder who has good ratings, cares for their geckos, and actually does their due diligence to take care of these little guys and will make sure that you're getting a healthy gecko and won't sell you a sick gecko. That's the most important thing, is trusting somebody to send them money and for them to send you something that you're going to be happy with and that isn't just going to die in a month. For one, I had somebody who bought a gecko from me, and unfortunately 90 days, or what was it, 2 months later, the gecko randomly passed away, and we went through all of her care and everything she was doing. She was doing everything right. So I told her, I said, hey, when you're ready for another gecko, I'll send you one for free, because these are things that I can't control, and I know she couldn't control. So it's not fair to either one of us that this gecko passed, but that's part of keeping, it's part of the hobby, and as a breeder, I'm just doing what I can to make it right, because it's not this girl's fault that gecko died. And it's more important to have good people in the hobby than it is just to make money from the hobby. So people have to have good ethics, and that's why buying an adult makes more sense, just because you can see it's well started and it's a healthy animal. Buying the babies, sometimes you buy from someone who's just trying to flip them as fast as they can, and it sucks, and it leads to, you know, it might lead to somebody leaving the hobby prematurely, or just kind of losing faith in themselves and thinking that it was their fault that the animal passed, and in reality the animal maybe never had a chance. So always make sure you're buying from reputable breeders. There's tons of people like me out there who are very reputable, have good reviews, and actually care for their animals a lot, and want to make sure that you have a good experience with our animals, or my animal. That wraps up the video, guys. I hope that this kind of helped you in understanding maybe deciding what's best for you going forward. Maybe it's worth it to pay more money to get an adult to start off with and to learn from, or maybe it's worth it to you to get a baby and raise it up and have that experience yourself, or maybe you do both. You know, maybe you start with one and then you decide, I think the other one's probably better for me, and then you go from there. But either way, as long as you are, as long as you're having fun in the hobby and you're learning something new every day and you're meeting cool people, that's what it's all about. So if you liked the video, guys, give it a thumbs up. If you could, please subscribe. It really helps out the channel and it's free, so big help there. But until next time, guys, stay safe and stay positive.